Chapter 1. The Mirage of Identity. Sherlock Holmes received word of an unusual case on a grey morning that carried an undercurrent of portent. A man had been found dead under circumstances that defied immediate explanation. Watson noted that the case carried an ineffable quality, as if the threads of deception were woven into every detail. Holmes, with his characteristic calm, contemplated the significance of the misshapen clues. He observed that, in a world filled with counterfeit appearances, truth often hid behind a veil of falsity. Holmes reflected on the initial reports. A single body discovered in an unremarkable manner, the victim's identity questioned almost from the outset. Watson recalled that the correspondence from the authorities had mentioned discrepancies in the victim's documents, a matter that piqued Holmes' keen interest. Holmes said, "This is no ordinary homicide. The man's identity appears to be a fabrication, a mere shadow cast upon a stolen life." Watson listened intently, sensing that the case would unravel layers of deception that threatened to expose truths long buried. The investigation commenced with an examination of the victim's belongings. Holmes perused a collection of papers, each document a testament to a life that, on the surface, appeared ordinary, but upon closer inspection revealed a series of anomalies. The victim's name, as recorded on the faded documents, was that of a gentleman whose life should have been documented and remembered in public records. Yet Holmes learned eyes quickly noted inconsistencies in the style and authenticity of the records. Watson remarked, "The very fabric of this man's existence seems stitched together by someone with a penchant for duplicity." Holmes agreed, adding that every detail demanded further scrutiny. An interview with the local constabulary soon followed. Inspector Gregson, who had been first on the scene, reported that the victim had been found with documents that were nearly illegible and, in some cases, obviously tampered with. Gregson stated, "I encountered a tangle of forged papers and a passport that bore a name unfamiliar to many, yet curiously accepted by the bureaucrats." Holmes' eyes narrowed as he considered the possibility of a deliberate masquerade. A life assumed and a reputation contrived to conceal a more complex truth. During their investigation, Holmes and Watson sought testimony from those who had known the victim, or at least the identity he claimed. A nervous clerk at a municipal office, whose voice trembled when recounting the man's supposed history, said, "I recall no record of any gentleman by that name in our ledgers." The documents appeared suddenly, as if someone had inserted a phantom into our records. Holmes interjected in his internal monologue that the careful manipulation of identity was an art practiced by those who wished to erase or reforge history. Watson observed, "It is as if the victim's very essence was an illusion, a carefully crafted story waiting to be unraveled." Holmes' inquiries soon led him to an individual with intimate knowledge of identity manipulation, a retired official from the forensics department. This gentleman, whose insight into document authentication was unsurpassed, noted that the forgeries bore the unmistakable hallmarks of someone with both audacity and a profound understanding of bureaucratic procedures. He stated, "I have seen many falsified documents in my career, but never have I encountered one so seamlessly executed that it nearly fooled even the most discerning eyes." Holmes responded in quiet assurance that this man's skill was matched only by his motive, hinting at an individual determined to reclaim what was once rightfully his. As the days passed, Holmes and Watson discovered that the victim's forged identity was not a mere accident of criminal opportunism, but a deliberate ploy orchestrated by someone seeking to inhabit another's existence. The investigation revealed that the impostor had adopted the identity of a gentleman who, for reasons unknown, had disappeared from public records. Watson noted in his journal that the discrepancies in the victim's identity led them to a labyrinth of aliases, each more elaborate than the last. Holmes, with his incisive logic, deduced that the individual behind the deception had meticulously reassembled an entire biography, a biography that was both meticulously detailed and disturbingly artificial. A visit to the archives provided further evidence of the fabrication. Holmes examined old registries and notarized documents, noting the careful alterations that allowed the victim's records to slip into circulation undetected. A clerk at the archives stated, "The records were altered with precision. The original gentleman's name was excised and replaced with another, as if his very existence had been erased from memory." Holmes reflected that the act of erasing a person from history required not only audacity, but also a profound desire to reclaim a lost identity. A desire that, if left unchecked, could easily spiral into murder. The investigation took a surprising turn when a contact in the underworld hinted at a connection between the victim and a notorious figure in the world of identity fraud. This contact, whose words were laced with cautious respect for the dangers of such dealings, noted, "The man you seek was not who he claimed to be. There was another, a real man whose name was stolen to cover a sordid past. The killer, it appears, may have been the one who lost everything to reclaim his honor." Holmes' mind raced with the implications. Here lay a story of profound betrayal and the lengths to which a person might go to restore a tarnished reputation. Holmes and Watson retraced the footsteps of the victim's false life, following leads that spanned the breadth of society, from the dusty ledgers of forgotten archives to the clandestine whispers of those who traded in secrets. A broker of rare documents confirmed that the victim's papers were not the work of a minor forger, but rather that of a master of deception, someone who had learned the craft from the very best. Watson remarked, "The meticulousness of these forgeries speaks of a mind as brilliant as it is dangerous." Holmes replied in thought that brilliance coupled with desperation could lead a person down a dark path, one where the boundary between justice and revenge became blurred. As the investigation deepened, Holmes began to notice subtle clues that hinted at a personal connection between the forger and the man whose identity had been stolen. A series of letters discovered in a neglected drawer revealed a tone of anguish and determination. In one such letter, an unknown correspondent wrote, "I have long endured the burden of a stolen name, an identity that was not mine to claim. The pain of living a lie is a torment I cannot bear. I must restore what was lost, even if it demands the ultimate sacrifice." Holmes' eyes shone with the fire of recognition. He realized that the letter was not merely an expression of remorse, but an admission of intent. A confession couched in the language of a man desperate to reclaim his life. The weight of the evidence pressed upon Holmes' mind. Each document, each testimony, and every carefully constructed piece of the puzzle pointed to a truth that was as unsettling as it was inevitable. Watson recorded in his journal that the victim had been nothing more than a pawn in a far more intricate game, a game where identity itself was the prize. Holmes said, "We stand on the brink of uncovering a truth that may shatter the illusion of self that many take for granted. The man we saw dead was merely a mask worn by another, a counterfeit existence doomed to be exposed." In the ensuing days, Holmes' inquiries led him to re-examine every scrap of evidence. He revisited the autopsy report, noting that the injuries sustained by the victim were not the result of a random assault, but rather a calculated act of violence that suggested a personal vendetta. The medical examiner had noted peculiar signs that the wounds were inflicted with a precision that betrayed the hand of someone who was not only skilled in subterfuge, but also driven by an inner turmoil. Watson recalled that the examiner's tone was somber as he recounted, "The wounds are clean, almost surgical. It is as if the killer sought to remove the imposter with exactitude, as one might remove an unwanted blemish." The puzzle grew even more perplexing when a series of confidential reports revealed that the stolen identity belonged to a man of considerable reputation before his name was purloined by the imposter. The original man, a figure of honor whose life had been marred by scandal and forced into obscurity, had been driven to desperation. Holmes said in his measured tone that such a transformation, from respected citizen to desperate recluse, could lead to extremes that defied conventional understanding. Watson observed that the transformation was reminiscent of a man whose soul had been battered by injustice, and who, in his quest for redemption, might commit an act that was both cruel and necessary in his own eyes. Amid these revelations, Holmes encountered an enigmatic individual whose past was intertwined with the lost identity. This person, an erstwhile friend of the original man, recounted in a hushed manner that the real man had suffered betrayal at the hands of those he trusted most. The friend said, "He was stripped of his dignity and left to wander in the shadows, his name tarnished by the falsehoods of others. In his heart, he nurtured a single hope: to reclaim his identity and restore his honor by any means necessary." Holmes absorbed this testimony with the silent intensity that had become his hallmark. He surmised that the real man, consumed by a desire for retribution and restoration, might have taken drastic measures when he learned that his stolen identity had been paraded as that of another. In a series of reflective moments, Holmes and Watson discussed the moral ambiguities that lay at the heart of the case. Watson noted that the interplay between identity and reputation was a delicate balance, easily upset by the machinations of those driven by a thirst for vengeance. Holmes responded in a measured tone. The pursuit of justice is often clouded by personal torment. When a man is forced to live a lie, the weight of that deception can drive him to actions that defy conventional morality. We must tread carefully as we unravel this tapestry of deceit. Watson agreed, remarking that every piece of evidence seemed to converge on a narrative of lost honor and the extreme measures taken to reclaim it. As the investigation drew deeper into the labyrinth of falsehoods, a decisive clue emerged from an overlooked detail: a receipt for a rare type of ink found on the victim's personal stationery. Holmes noted that the ink was known to be used only by a select few, including an individual reputed for his mastery in forgery. Holmes said, "This detail, though seemingly insignificant, could be the key that unlocks the true sequence of events." It suggests that the man behind these deceptions was intimately familiar with the art of falsehood. Watson recorded that the discovery of the receipt was a turning point, for it provided the tangible link between the fabricated identity and the person who had orchestrated it. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed, Holmes meticulously reassembled the timeline of events. He constructed a mental map of the victim's days leading up to his death, noting the sporadic encounters, the hurried transactions, and the shadowy figures that seemed to orbit around him. Watson recalled that Holmes' mind worked like a finely tuned instrument, capable of extracting meaning from the subtlest of hints. Holmes' analysis revealed that the victim had been preparing for a meeting, a final confrontation that promised to expose the true architect behind the stolen identity. Yet fate had intervened, and the planned encounter had instead culminated in a violent termination. The gravity of the case settled upon Holmes and Watson as they prepared to confront the ultimate question: who was the real man behind the stolen identity, and what drove him to murder? Holmes said, with the weight of his deductions evident in his tone, "Every detail, every document, every whispered rumor has led us to this point. We must now consider the possibility that the man who has been presented to us as a victim was in fact the instrument of his own undoing, a mere substitute for the one who truly sought to reclaim his life." Watson acknowledged the profound implications of these words, recognizing that the path ahead was fraught with moral complexity and personal tragedy. The investigation took on an urgency that belied the quiet determination of Holmes. He arranged meetings with those who had once been close to the original identity, piecing together fragments of a life that had been deliberately erased. A former colleague recalled in a measured tone, "He was a man of impeccable integrity until circumstances forced him into obscurity. I remember him saying that reclaiming his true name was worth any cost, even if it meant confronting those who had betrayed him." Holmes recorded this testimony with careful deliberation, for it hinted at a motive that was as personal as it was profound. In a final, painstaking review of the evidence, Holmes began to form a theory that, while unsettling, accounted for every detail. The stolen identity was not simply the result of a criminal impersonation. It was the deliberate work of a man who had been wronged, a man whose heart burned with the need to restore what he had lost. The murder, then, was not an act of random violence, but a calculated elimination of the imposter, a symbolic reclaiming of his own destiny. Watson noted that Holmes' voice carried an air of finality as he stated, "The man we see dead was but a vessel, a proxy through which the true owner of the identity sought to reassert his existence." As the chapter drew to a close, Holmes and Watson stood on the threshold of a revelation that would challenge everything they knew about identity and justice. The evidence was now aligned, a precarious balance of truth and artifice that promised to unravel the carefully constructed web of deceit. Holmes said in his measured tone, "We have entered the labyrinth, and the center holds a truth as bitter as it is inevitable. The stolen identity is a curse that has driven a man to the extreme. A man who now, in reclaiming his name, has crossed a line from which there is no return." Watson recorded these final words with a heavy heart, knowing that the journey ahead would reveal not only the depths of human deception, but also the cost of reclaiming one's true self. Thus, as the investigation reached its critical juncture, the spectre of the past loomed large over the present. The clues that had once seemed disparate were now coalescing into a single, haunting narrative. Holmes' mind, ever relentless in its pursuit of truth, prepared to confront the final stage of this intricate puzzle, a stage where the boundaries between victim and perpetrator blurred, and the stolen identity would reveal its ultimate, tragic secret. Chapter 2. The Unmasking of Truth. Holmes's mind remained abuzz with the revelations unearthed in the days preceding. He and Watson resolved to follow the delicate thread that now wound its way through the maze of counterfeit identities. The evidence had begun to align into a coherent yet disquieting narrative, one that promised to expose the true architect behind the deception. Holmes said, "Watson, the subtle intricacies of this case demand that we trace the stolen identity back to its origin. Every forged document, every whispered confession has led us here, to the man who once was and who now seeks to reclaim his honor through a most grievous act." Watson recorded these words in his journal, his pen reflecting both admiration for Holmes' security and a heavy foreboding regarding the moral complexities ahead. Holmes began by revisiting the collection of letters and documents that had first hinted at a life torn asunder. He reread the anguished words penned in haste, the desperate admissions and fragmented recollections that spoke of betrayal and loss. A recurring signature emerged, a name long obscured by the layers of deception: Edward Blackwood. Holmes recalled that a former colleague had mentioned this name in connection with a life once filled with integrity and repute, now reduced to a ghost wandering amidst the ruins of a stolen past. Watson noted that every instance in which Edward Blackwood's name surfaced carried with it the weight of unfulfilled redemption, and Holmes acknowledged that the truth must reside within the story of this lost man. In careful deliberation, Holmes arranged for interviews with those who had once known Edward Blackwood. A trusted acquaintance, who spoke in a measured tone, recalled, "Edward had been a man of great promise until misfortune befell him. A series of betrayals that left his name tarnished and his reputation in tatters. He once confided that his identity was more than a mere label. It was the soul of his existence." Holmes listened intently, his eyes reflecting the burden of the past. He said in his internal reasoning that the victim's identity had been a cloak for the impostor's misdeeds, a counterfeit existence erected upon the very real anguish of a man wronged by fate. Watson interjected in quiet reflection that the intricacies of identity could sometimes become a labyrinth from which one could never fully extricate oneself. With these recollections fueling his resolve, Holmes meticulously retraced the timeline of events leading to the fateful meeting between the impostor and the unseen owner of the stolen identity. He constructed a mental chronology, aligning witness testimonies, forged documents, and the autopsy's clinical details with the raw emotional remnants of Edward Blackwood's history. Holmes said, "It becomes increasingly clear that the man who lies dead was but a proxy, a vessel that unwittingly carried the identity of one whose soul has long suffered. The true culprit is driven not solely by malice, but by an overwhelming need to restore what was forcefully taken from him. Watson recorded his agreement, noting that the lines between justice and vengeance, between reclaiming one's honor and resorting to vigilantism, had grown perilously thin. In pursuit of further clarity, Holmes sought out an expert in historical document restoration, a man reputed for his uncompromising honesty and keen eye for the subtle nuances of penmanship. This expert, when presented with the documents and the mysterious receipt for a rare ink, stated, "The ink bears a unique composition, one employed only by a select few with the expertise and audacity required for such elaborate forgeries. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that the very individual who mastered these techniques did so to weave an alternate identity, a facade that could shield his true self from public disgrace." Holmes absorbed the comment with a quiet nod, remarking in his thoughts that the rarity of the ink was a signature of intent. Watson added that the convergence of such technical mastery with personal desperation was a phenomenon seldom encountered, one that painted the portrait of a man in turmoil. The investigation then steered Holmes and Watson toward a clandestine meeting with an individual who had once shared intimate confidences with Edward Blackwood. This person, whose voice trembled with memories of the past, revealed that Edward had been compelled to adopt a new identity after a series of scandals orchestrated by those who envied his stature. He said, Edward's original name was smeared by those who coveted his influence, and he was forced into obscurity. In his solitude, he nurtured the hope of reclaiming his true self, even if it meant embracing actions that society would never forgive. Holmes' expression remained impassive, though his internal musings acknowledged the profound tragedy of a man pushed to the brink of moral collapse. Watson recorded that the sorrow in the witness's words resonated with the notion that sometimes the journey to reclaim one's identity was paved with irrevocable acts. Days merged into nights as Holmes meticulously pieced together the evidence. He re-examined every detail of the crime, noting the deliberate precision with which the impostor had been eliminated. The autopsy had revealed wounds that were inflicted with an almost clinical exactness, a signature of someone who had rehearsed the act in the quiet recesses of a tormented mind. Holmes said, "The manner of death was not random nor impulsive. It was the calculated act of a man whose every move was guided by the desire to reclaim his lost honor." The impostor was not merely a victim, but the embodiment of a stolen life. Watson recorded that the gravity of this conclusion was tempered by an awareness of the profound personal cost that such an act entailed. The turning point in the investigation emerged when a discreet informant provided Holmes with a key piece of evidence, a faded diary entry that hinted at a long-standing vendetta. The diary, discovered among a cache of forgotten memorabilia, recounted the slow erosion of a man's dignity as his true identity was systematically usurped by the machinations of those around him. The entry read, "I have borne the humiliation of a life not my own for far too long. The day will come when I restore the honor that has been stripped from me, even if it requires me to shed the blood of the one who wears my name like a cursed mantle." Holmes' eyes shone with a mixture of solemnity and grim determination as he absorbed the significance of these words. He said in his inner monologue that this confession, though hidden in the pages of a forgotten diary, was the missing link that tied together the intricate web of deceit. Emboldened by this revelation, Holmes set his sights on locating Edward Blackwood. Through a network of discreet inquiries and careful cross-referencing of archival records, he traced the remnants of Edward's life to a modest dwelling, scarcely mentioned in official directories. Holmes said, "Here lies the final chapter of our inquiry, the place where the remnants of Edward Blackwood's true identity may yet be salvaged from the wreckage of betrayal." Watson recorded that despite the unassuming nature of the location, the air of quiet desperation that pervaded its history was palpable even in the careful phrasing of Holmes' deduction. In a confrontation that was as inevitable as it was heartbreaking, Holmes arranged a meeting with the man who had been forced into the shadows of a stolen identity. The meeting unfolded with an intensity that belied the restrained language of its participants. The man, whose features bore the marks of long-held sorrow and hard-won determination, acknowledged his identity with a measured calm. He said, "I have lived a life defined by loss, a life in which my name was no longer my own. The theft of my identity became a wound that festered over the years, until I was compelled to act in order to restore what little honor remained." Holmes listened with unwavering focus, his analytical mind mapping each nuance of the confession. He said, "Your actions, though draped in the guise of reclaiming honor, have crossed the boundaries of what our society deems acceptable. Yet I understand the torment that drove you to this extreme measure." Watson noted that the man's voice trembled with both remorse and resolute defiance, a juxtaposition that underscored the tragic dimensions of his plight. The man continued, "I did not choose this path lightly. Every moment I lived under the weight of a false identity was a moment stolen from the man I once was. The impostor who bore my name was a living mockery of my past, a symbol of the disgrace I had been forced to endure. In eliminating him, I sought to reclaim not just my name, but the very essence of who I am." Holmes' eyes narrowed as he weighed the man's words against the evidence meticulously gathered. He said, "Your confession elucidates the motivation behind the crime, yet it does not absolve the consequences of your actions. The act you committed was one of both calculated precision and desperate retribution." The conversation deepened as Holmes probed further into the psychological burden that had driven the man to commit murder. He said, "Was there not another way? A path that might have restored your honor without such irrevocable loss? The value of one's identity is immense, yet the sanctity of life is held in even higher regard." The man's response was laden with sorrow. I pondered that question endlessly, and in the quiet torment of my solitude, I found no recourse. The public had abandoned me, and the institutions that once protected my legacy had turned their gaze elsewhere. My only recourse was to enact a justice that, though harsh, was born of a necessity too profound to ignore. Watson recorded that the interplay between justification and remorse painted a portrait of a man entrapped by circumstance, a man for whom the reclamation of identity had become an act of both defiance and despair. Holmes, in his measured tone, remarked, "In the realm of human affairs, the boundaries between justice and vengeance are often indistinct. You have taken upon yourself a burden that few can bear, and in doing so, you have altered the course of your life irrevocably." The man acknowledged this with a slow, heavy nod, adding, "I am aware that the path I chose has consequences that extend beyond my personal grief. I accept the judgment of both the law and my own conscience, for I acted in a moment when the only alternative was to live as a spectre of my former self." Holmes said quietly, "The truth of your existence lies not solely in your actions, but in the profound tragedy that led you to them." In the days that followed, Holmes and Watson delved further into the legal and moral implications of the case. They spoke with legal scholars and former colleagues of Edward Blackwood, each conversation deepening the complexity of the narrative. One scholar remarked, "The law is clear in its condemnation of murder, yet history has shown that acts born out of desperate attempts to reclaim lost dignity often elicit a measure of sympathy from the public." Holmes said, "It is the duty of our society to reconcile the ideals of justice with the nuances of human suffering. The measure of a man's honor is not solely determined by the laws he breaks, but by the pain he endures in pursuit of redemption." Watson recorded that these reflections underscored the inherent tragedy of a man who was forced to take extreme steps to salvage the remnants of a once proud identity. The investigation, now at its climax, forced Holmes to confront the stark duality of human nature, the interplay of genius and vulnerability, of moral clarity and personal torment. In a final, candid interview, the man confessed in a tone that mingled resignation with defiant hope. "I never sought to become a murderer, but rather to vanquish the spectre that had stolen my very self. In the absence of recourse, I was compelled to act, even as I mourned the irrevocable loss of the life I once knew." Holmes said in a measured reflection, Your confession is both a window into the depths of your suffering and a testament to the complexities that define human existence. It forces us to question whether reclaiming one's identity can ever justify the loss of another life. Watson recorded these words with a deep sense of empathy, acknowledging that the case defied the simple binaries of right and wrong. As the legal authorities began to assemble the evidence for a formal inquiry, Holmes continued his own solitary meditation on the nature of identity. He said, "In the grand tapestry of life, the threads of truth are often obscured by the interplay of fate and human error. What we have witnessed is not merely the unmasking of a murderer, but the tragic unraveling of a man who was forced to live in the shadows of a stolen life." Watson noted that Holmes' contemplative silence spoke volumes, a reflection of a mind that had seen too many human tragedies unfold in the pursuit of justice. In a quiet moment of introspection, Holmes recorded in his own private musings that the case had transformed his understanding of identity. He said, "The stolen identity is not simply a legal fiction, but a deeply personal tragedy that has led to irreversible consequences. In reclaiming his name, the man who once was has become both the avenger and the victim of a system that failed him." Watson concurred, adding that the case had left an indelible mark on both of their souls, a reminder that the pursuit of truth is often a journey through the darkest corridors of human despair. The inquiry eventually reached its conclusion, and the man who had once borne the name Edward Blackwood was left to face the full measure of a justice that recognized both his transgression and his profound suffering. In a final exchange with Holmes, the man said softly, "I have paid a heavy price for the honor I sought to reclaim. May history judge me not solely as a murderer, but as a man who was compelled by circumstances beyond his control." Holmes replied in measured tones, "History is a fickle judge, but the truth remains immutable. You have taken an irreversible step, and in doing so, you have illuminated the depths of a human tragedy that extends far beyond the confines of the law." Watson recorded that his heart was heavy with the realization that even the most brilliant of minds could not fully reconcile the complexity of human motivations. In the ensuing days, as the legal proceedings began and the public discourse swirled with conflicting emotions, Holmes and Watson found solace in the quiet certainty of their own understanding. They recognized that the case of the stolen identity would linger in the annals of their investigations as a reminder that the truth, however deeply buried, ultimately demands its reckoning. Holmes said, "We have unmasked not only the identity behind the crime, but also the stark reminder that every life, every name, carries with it an intrinsic worth that defies the machinations of deceit." Watson recorded that the weight of this lesson was both a source of comfort and a solemn reminder of the fragile nature of human existence. As the investigation drew to its inevitable close, Holmes and Watson prepared to leave behind the echoes of a case that had challenged their very notions of justice and identity. The man who had reclaimed his stolen name now faced a future fraught with uncertainty, a future where the consequences of his actions would reverberate through the lives of those he had touched. Holmes said in reflective tones, "Our work here may be done, but the lessons we have learned shall remain with us. The true cost of reclaiming one's identity is measured not in the fleeting satisfaction of vengeance, but in the enduring scars that define the human spirit." Watson recorded these final words, acknowledging that in the pursuit of truth, even the most noble intentions are often marred by the inescapable realities of human frailty. Thus, as the final chapter of this intricate investigation was written, the spectre of the stolen identity faded into the shadows of history, a poignant reminder that the quest for redemption, however noble, can exact a price too high for any man to bear without leaving an indelible mark upon his soul. Holmes said, "In every case, there lies a kernel of truth that, once unearthed, challenges us to reconsider the boundaries between right and wrong. The man before us has become a symbol of both the triumph and the tragedy of human ambition." Watson recorded that the echoes of these words would serve as a perpetual guide in their future endeavors, a testament to the enduring complexity of the human condition. In the quiet aftermath, as the legal and moral judgments were handed down, Holmes and Watson retreated into the reflective solitude of their correspondence. Watson's final entry in his journal captured the essence of their shared journey. We have witnessed a man reclaim a stolen identity at the cost of his soul, a cost that haunts the corridors of memory long after the deed is done. In the intricate dance between justice and personal redemption, we are left to ponder whether the restoration of one's honor can ever truly mend the wounds inflicted by the passage of time. Holmes, in his silent contemplation, acknowledged that while the case had reached its conclusion in the eyes of the law, the deeper truths uncovered would forever remain a part of his relentless pursuit of justice. And so, as the city settled into a fragile calm after the storm of revelations, Holmes and Watson carried with them the enduring legacy of a case that had unmasked the true cost of identity. A cost measured not in mere names or documents, but in the profound sacrifices of a man who, in reclaiming what was rightfully his, became both a savior of his own honor and a casualty of a world unwilling to forgive the fractures of its own making. The investigation had ended, but its echoes resonated in every whispered conversation, every reflective pause in the quiet hours of night. Holmes said, "Let this case serve as a reminder that the pursuit of truth demands not only our intellect, but also our compassion. For in the labyrinth of human existence, the line between heroism and tragedy is often drawn in the subtle shades of our own frailties." Watson recorded that these words, spoken with the measured gravity of one who had seen too much, would remain with them as an enduring lesson in the delicate interplay between identity, honor, and the unyielding march of fate. In the end, the man who had once borne the stolen name of Edward Blackwood was left to face the final verdict of a society torn between retribution and empathy. His journey, fraught with sorrow, defiance, and an unwavering determination to reclaim a truth that had been denied him, had forever altered the lives of those who had borne witness to it. Holmes said, "History will remember this case not as a mere tale of murder and forgery, but as a poignant illustration of the lengths to which a man will go to reclaim the very essence of who he is." Watson recorded that with every case closed, the search for truth continued, a journey in which each revelation illuminated the enduring complexity of the human spirit. Thus concluded the inquiry into the stolen identity, a case that, in its unraveling, had exposed the raw, unvarnished truth of human desperation and the indomitable will to reclaim one's self. Holmes and Watson, bound together by their shared experiences and the solemn weight of what they had uncovered, departed with a renewed understanding that the pursuit of justice is as much a battle of the soul as it is a quest for truth. And in that understanding lay the final, unspoken truth, that every identity, no matter how shattered or misappropriated, holds within it the promise of redemption, even if the path to that redemption is paved with sorrow and irrevocable loss.